Heads up, this video is going to contain spoilers for Die Hard, so if you haven't already seen it, you should go do that. Die Hard recently celebrated its 30th anniversary in July, and it's absolutely one of my favorite films of all time. So, I don't know, I wanted to talk about it before the year was out. Die Hard is a film that was directed by John McTiernan in 1988, and it follows the story of a group of thieves disguised as... You know what? I'm not even going to try to summarize this. I'm just going to read the description straight off the back of the box. High above the city of LA, a team of terrorists has seized a building, taken hostages, and declared war. But one man has managed to escape detection, an off-duty cop. He's alone, tired, and the only chance anyone has. Bruce Willis stars as New York City detective John McClane, newly arrived in Los Angeles to spend the holiday with his estranged wife. But as McClane waits for his wife's office party to break up, terrorists take control of the building. While the terrorists' leader, Hans Gruber, and his savage henchmen round up hostages, McClane slips away unnoticed. Armed with only a service revolver and his cunning, McClane launches his own one-man war. Okay, so we've all seen Die Hard, and if we've all already seen it, then I can safely forego any type of intro here because, whatever, you already know what you're getting into, and I just want to get straight into the meat of it. I like things that break the mold, and in 1988, Die Hard broke the mold. It presented something completely new, a new type of action film. At the time, people loved it, and even now, 30 years later, people are still talking about it. It has an enormous legacy and an enormous following, and personally, it's one of my favorite films of all time. So recently, I rewatched it, twice, and I sort of rediscovered why I love the film. It has an enormous legacy and an enormous following because it set this impossibly high standard for what action films could look like. And it's just an incredibly well-crafted film. As I said before, I really love action films, and I really love Die Hard, and I would go so far as to say that Die Hard is one of the best action films of all time. And I'm going to attempt to back that statement up. Let's get to it. So, the simplest way to get this started, and the simplest way to explain myself, is to put everything in its simplest form. And after I did some pretty hard thinking about Die Hard and action films, I came up with a nice, simple number, 3. Die Hard is one of the best action films of all time for 3 reasons. These 3 reasons are, 1. It tells a simple, believable story. 2. It experiments with tone and pace. And 3. All of its action is meaningful and easy to understand. These 3 discrete reasons, or let me change the word, these 3 discrete elements are what make Die Hard so special. And I think I can prove it. So I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then I'm going to play some audio from some people who worked on the film, and then I'll talk some more, and then back to the audio, that sort of thing. All right? So let's start with the first element. Die Hard is one of the best action films of all time because it tells a simple, believable story. This one should be fairly obvious because, well, it's a simple story of good versus evil. John McClane is just a guy who is stuck in a bad situation. Hans Gruber is just a guy who is creating a bad situation. John McClane is heroic, but not too heroic. He is a good guy, but he isn't perfect. And Hans Gruber is evil, but not too evil. He is ruthless, but not too ruthless. And all of that just means that these characters aren't caricatures. They're more real, or they feel real, like someone you could see on the street. And the narrative represents a struggle between them, a struggle between good and evil. It's that simple. And yeah, it's literally about a group of thieves disguised as terrorists who are attempting to rob a corporation and all that. But ultimately, it's just the story of a clash between two guys on opposite sides of the moral spectrum.
The incident sort of that sold me on this project, I turned the script down a couple of times, but the incident that sold me on it was a little thing we made up coming up here. He says it was his first day driving in a limo, and the guy responds, "Don't worry, it's the first time riding in one." That was sort of the essential American thing, to refuse to ride in the back of a car with someone else driving. You sit next to him just out of simple respect, and that this guy would do that. I thought it was a nice way to say he was a decent guy. Right there is the first step. We discover what the essence of his character was after we were about halfway through the movie. It wasn't in the script at all. In the script, he was, just heavy-duty New York cop. And we figured out that the essence of his character was he didn't really like himself very much, and he was doing the best he could.
There is a quiet dignity in John McClane that I really wanted to play. This character, I think, is a lot closer to anything. It's a lot closer, to me than anything that I've done, and I wanted to play a character who was not a superhero, who was not invincible, who was vulnerable, and who was able to be afraid and to feel pain. And I think people relate to that. People, there's a lot of justice served in this film, and there's a lot of things for the audience to kind of cheer about.
One thing that's great about the movie is that all these people and all these stories are really vivid. And in order to get people to care about the world, you got to blow up a building. In that snide review in Salon, what was it? What's so hard about blowing up a building? It's about blowing up a building that matters. It's like deconstructing the proudest accomplishment of our corporate civilization in order to get down to the level where you can care about the mechanicals, in the sense of Shakespeare's mechanicals. And that's one of the things this picture has that a lot of action films don't. And, all the pictures that have, imitated the action beats of Die Hard in a whatever, have all missed the point. Because Die Hard is successful because everybody in it is really cool and real things happen to them. And it's like, you don't only see the war, you see the context of the war. These people get smashed. I think basically it's the story is really satisfying because it's like comes from those patterns that we are born with, that our culture is founded upon. There are structures, just as there are structures in our language that underlie, that are built into all of us. It's like artists don't invent, they discover, and they give you something that resonates with something that's inside you. And the closer they get to the real deal, the real stuff, the gut level stuff, then the longer it's going to last because it remains satisfying beyond fashion, beyond period. I think it's a film that's going to live because it's satisfying. It's a good story. It's a great ride. It's got depth and heart, and it's just a hell of a lot of fun.
Now onto the second element. Die Hard is one of the best action films of all time because it experiments with tone and pace. This one is going to be a little bit more difficult to explain. So let's start with tone. Tone is basically the emotion of the film, if you will. Is the film funny? Is it mean? Is it angry? Is it joyous? Etc. Tone is just that. And Die Hard does something special in that it expresses a surprising range of emotions. it's serious, and then it's joyous, and then it's a little bit mean, and then it's a little bit funny. It switches things around a lot, and none of it ever feels out of place. That's a hard trick to pull off. And now on to pace. Pace is basically the speed of the film, how fast everything is moving along. Some films are slow, others are fast, but most exist somewhere in the middle. And again, Die Hard does something special in that it moves at whatever pace it feels like. It might be fast action at one point, and then it might switch pretty casually to some slower dialogue-heavy scenes. And it never feels weird. That's the surprising part. And although tone and pace might not seem that important, they are. Tone and pace can make or break a narrative, and are especially important in keeping an audience's interest.
My principal concern going into this was that it was a story that would concern terrorists. And terrorist movies are usually mean, filled with all sorts of mean, nasty acts. And I didn't say yes to this project until we figured out ways to put, in essence, some joy in it. As we go through it, you'll see there are a number of decisions that show up over and over and over again. They're all on that basic theme of how do we take the meanness out of a terrorist story and turn it into something that is essentially summer entertainment. I hadn't read the book. I read the early scripts, and actually they're the ones I turned down. The two principal changes I made were, in essence, that little thing, that nature of the character, that he's a basic American guy instead of being the strong-jawed, latter-day Dirty Harry. And the second thing was, I may be getting ahead of the story, but just in essence, turning the terrorist story into robbery. People can have fun with the robbery. A terrorist story is, by definition, dark and unhappy. But with a good caper, you can appreciate the bad guys too. And that allows us to put essentially some joy in the bad guy's activity. Which, it's a silly sort of thing that you don't discuss with studio executives because they'll think you're untrustworthy. But putting some joy in this story was my principal concern going into it. Finding ways that you could get some humor that wasn't forced, but at least lightness. And finding ways in which you could simply enjoy what was going on, rather than having, the bad guys do very bad things that make you hate them, and then you get even and do bad things to them in return. It's not a joyful experience. This is an enormous comedy, a character comedy, if you will. I mean, it's a Shakespearean comedy, so mostly the cops are the comedians, the cops and the FBI. The comedy has to be sort of just on the edge and can never be about the center of the story. The center of the story is, or the center of the conflict is between Bruce and the people holding his wife. And there's never any comedy or ridicule associated with that aspect of the plot. You can have the comedians muck around in the edges, but you can't make fun of the center of the story. And if you keep those straight, it's astonishing what sort of broad things you can get away with. I've always, even though I'm probably musical illiterate, I've found myself thinking of movies as musical structures. A lot of people think that their books are print or somehow based on print, and they try to apply print logic to film, and personally I don't think it works. Now, hear this little piece of music starting? Remember what I said earlier about, in essence, what I was trying to introduce was a sense of joy. And I had this piece of music in my head for a long time, and started saying, okay, we got to play this thing that's in, I remembered it from Clockwork Orange, and I knew it was in the Ninth Symphony. But it was like a couple of months later that I learned that the title of the damn piece of music is The Ode to Joy. Michael Kamen. There's a wonderful sense of play in his score. A slightly ironic, facetious sense that the movie has we were trying to get throughout, he picked up on when he just saw the movie silent. And, so he has all of the little repeats of the Christmas carols and various things woven through it. And he helps with the thing we've been talking about how do you deal with a comedy in something like this so that it doesn't impinge on the story. Very often, the music will let the audience know it's okay to think this is ridiculous, because the storytellers think this is ridiculous. A lot of people have commented, and they're completely right, that the plot in this is ludicrous. So terrorists pretending to be terrorists so they could be robbers is ridiculous. But it allowed me to get to the essential thing that I was talking about earlier, that we can enjoy an intention on the part of the bad guys to cleverly snatch a whole pile of money. You can't enjoy it if right at this point he was trying to get the money because of some political thing. The sense of joy would go out of the movie at that instant. And it doesn't matter how many times they hum the ode to joy, the joy would be gone.
And now onto the third element. Die Hard is one of the best action films of all time because all of its action is meaningful and easy to understand. This one is fairly simple. To me, the goal of action is never action for action's sake. It's action that exists only in service of either narrative development or character development. I think that's pretty simple, but a lot of action films miss that, and I don't really know why. Die Hard does this really well in that it uses every action set piece to dictate a change in the characters or to further the plot. There's no extraneous action, and because of that, the action that is there feels more meaningful. This little trick also serves a double purpose, in that it makes the action easier to understand. Every set piece is action and then a change or consequence. John McClane runs out of ammo, no more gun. John McClane steps on glass, his movement is affected. Action, consequence. Action, consequence. This relationship boils action down to its simplest and leaves the audience with a scene that is ultimately easy to understand. Like I said before, a lot of action films still mess this up, and I don't really know why. It's pretty simple.
Comedy and action are very similar. I've kind of been typecast, in those two genres. I haven't done a lot of drama. They all depend on action, They all have huge physical elements, and they all have to be very tightly structured in terms of the action. Both comedy and action films have to make sense on a physical level and on the interaction between the physical and between the actors and the stuff, They're based on timing. I guess the reason I've been able to do both those genres well is because they're very similar, from a design point of view. I mean, yeah, okay, maybe you use different kinds of colors, but the thing about it is that what's revealed and when and all that are very important. Drama tends to be atmospheric, it's like a surround, a womb that contains the action, but in action and comedies, the sets are major players. I could tell the backstory, which was very important on Dad, just try and keep it real. But it's not the same, not the same. The thing about comedy and action films is the speed, how close together things have to be, like this, and this. I get more pleasure out of telling people about Die Hard. People who really love movies that don't think of Die Hard as a classic, and people that have really high taste and don't consider action movies to be kind of real. I'm making air quotes, folks, real movies. That happened this summer. Someone who I really like and respect on the film was like all into Ashes and Diamonds and Polish films and stuff. And, we were talking about what I had done, and I said, well, if you want to see a good movie, see Die Hard. And eventually she and her husband sat down to watch it on tape, and it was like, people have no idea how solid this picture is, how good it is. It's because there is no cheating. And more I'm beginning to believe that that is the secret.
And the only reason that any of this works is that the cast and crew were all so damn talented. Like, a lot of people reference the director, John McTiernan, as the entity that brought the film together. And he did do an incredible job, don't get me wrong. But I think there's more to the story than that. I think that, like, literally everyone who worked on this film did an incredible job. I think Jackson DeGovia did an amazing job as the production designer. I think Jan de Bont's cinematography brought something really elegant to the film. I think John Link and Frank Uriosti pulled off a pretty amazing edit. I think Jeb Stewart and Steven D'Souza wrote a surprisingly smart screenplay. I think Michael Kamen's score really did something to elevate the film. And I think the performances of Bruce Willis, Bonnie Bedelia, Alan Rickman, and Reginald VelJohnson were just fantastic. So I guess what I'm saying is shoutouts to them.
We were all really lucky to work on it. Like, it's not something you deserve, something that happens to you. And it was all great that we were up to it. I'm really glad that I got a chance to do this picture. I'm really glad that Joel let me do this picture. And I'm really glad that McTiernan accepted me, and Jan was so great, and everybody who worked on it was so great. I mean, I keep coming back to that over and over again. It was this magical time when everybody was at the top of their game. You know, we've all more or less done better and worse things in our careers, but at this particular moment, we were all like cooking, like a great jazz session or something. You know, you get a bunch of really good musicians together and they produce something for the ages. That's what this was like. You know, a great jam session.
Now, I don't want to drag this on for too long. So, to conclude, Die Hard is one of the best action films of all time because it tells a simple, believable story, because it experiments with tone and pace, and because all of its action is meaningful and easy to understand. And all of that works because the cast and crew all worked really hard to make sure they were making something great. That's what I think, anyway. And I hope I did a decent job of explaining myself, and I hope I did a decent job of proving my point. And hey, maybe I helped some of y'all learn something new about Die Hard, or maybe I helped some of y'all learn something new about action films. That'd be cool. And if any of y'all have any thoughts on Die Hard, you should put them in the comments. I'm really interested to see what y'all have to say about it. Anyway, I think that's it. Die Hard. It's pretty good.